Jamaican Creole, more popularly known as Patois, is spoken by almost all Jamaicans. But where did it come from? Is it a language? Why is it called Patwa? And what's a Patwa anyways? What could have caused this? Well, let me try to explain. Between the 1500s to the 1800s, over 600,000 Africans were taken from their homeland to Jamaica. They were mostly Africans from the Akan tribe, that's the southern regions of present-day Ghana and the Ivory Coast in West Africa. The Akan tribe was followed by Igbo, Yoruba, Congo, Fon, and Ibibio tribes. This diversity resulted in a linguistic melting pot. As you can imagine, all these different tribes of people with their distinct languages forced to cohabitate and labor together needed to find a way to communicate with each other and interpret the marching orders of the Englishman. Therefore, a pidgin was formed. Wait, a pigeon you say? Is that a bird? Is that a bird? No. A pidgin is simplified speech used for communication between people with different languages. Simplified to mainly nouns and verbs, no grammar. Pidgins are formed to facilitate business or trade between two different linguistic groups. It is from this pidgin that Jamaican Creole may have been born. While a Creole is the native language of a people, a pidgin is not native to anyone. It is argued that when the Africans reproduced, their children learned the pidgin and over time it developed into a language. According to Chomsky, an American linguist, philosopher, cognitive scientist, historian, social critic, and political activist, children are born with the innate ability to learn and create language. Think of language in and of itself. It didn't fall out of the sky, nor was it extracted like a mineral from the soil. We painstakingly procured this means of communication over the centuries. So, the theory is that with time, the pidgin developed a grammatical structure and a phonological system separate from English. Most of the words were from English, but the sentence structure and the sound system were derived from the African languages. While babies were growing up, more Africans were sailing in, and so a lot of transactional learning and development took place. According to this theory, the pidgin survived and was passed down to the next generation, where it eventually became a Creole. Now, a Creole is a mixed language created under strenuous and coerced circumstances specific to the transatlantic slave trade, where people from a whole different continent had to find a way to communicate with people from another continent under duress. It was necessary for the white slave owners to convince the black slaves and themselves that the blacks were inferior to them in order to maintain the system of physical and mental enslavement that ensued for centuries. Hence, they demonized everything, from their physical appearance to their way of life, and of course, the way they spoke. How slaves were afforded certain privileges that field slaves weren't, and so the social stratifications began. How slaves were exposed to more English and therefore could formulate speech patterns closer to that of their masters. As well, because they were indoors, weren't as dark-hued as those who worked in the fields. As it would be had, some thought themselves better off, and eventually better than their field counterparts. Field slaves were at the bottom of the social strata. This kind of marginalization passed on from generation to generation. Ideas of inferiority was so deeply entrenched that centuries later, some Africans still saw their upward mobility engrossed in becoming more Caucasian in speech and appearance. This belief, of course, wasn't unfounded, but was systemically supported by the post-slave and post-colonial societies. If you were a fair-skinned black, it meant your family had some white mixed into it at some point, and that perhaps came with some sense of social and financial security and education. As such, you were more likely to speak the variety of English closer to the standard, and with that came more opportunities. For those, usually of a darker hue, who didn't have any form of security or education, Jamaican Creole was the main language of use. Jamaican Creole, the language of slaves, considered a lower dialectal variety to the revered Standard English, the language of the poor, the language of the dark-hued people, a Patwa. Now, this term doesn't have a formal linguistic definition, so let's take a look at the etymology. According to the online etymology dictionary, Patwa, a Patwa is a provincial dialect, a dialect peculiar to a district or locality, especially among the uneducated classes. 1640s from French patois, native or local speech, especially in reference to Jamaican English from 1934. In Jamaica, Patois has all but shed its original meaning and is now a broadly used and accepted name for the Creole language. Personally, I prefer to say Jamaican Creole or Jamaican for short, but will not deny the affinity or notoriety that Patois carries in the hearts of its people. You may be wondering, so what's a dialect? Well, a dialect is simply a variety of a language. English has tons of dialects. In England itself, there are around 37 dialects of the language. Jamaican English is a dialect of English. American English is a dialect of English. South African English is also a dialect of English. Australian English is a dialect of English. And of course, I could go on and on. Today, discrimination based on color and language still exists. People are treated more or less favorably based on their shade of black or the language they speak. Tragically, to this day, remnants of this dis-ease with self is still viral among black people. But fortunately, equal opportunities now exist for all Jamaicans who have a desire to claim them. Thanks for watching, and before I go, Happy Heroes Day.